Doug tried to extend his senses. The animals were quiet, probably because there weren't any. There weren't any, or they were just passing through. The fire crew helpers would have put all the food in bear bags or sealed and locked up in the vans. He listened for a bit and heard a few scratches on his tent. Those always sounded louder than whatever was actually making the noise, probably a mouse. There were some snacks in his bag, so it always attracted mice overnight. A few moments passed and the scratching and the rustling stopped. Then it sounded like nails on wood. A pan lid got rustled and then nothing. The moments passed as Doug got an image in his mind of what was going on, just in time for Death's shriek to involuntarily release from a mouse outside. The predator allowed the shriek for a second as a satisfactory reward to itself, and then a merciful crunch followed. The noise the predator made after that reverberated through the camp and sounded like a cross between a Tyrannosaurus Rex from the dinosaur movies and the hunter alien from the popular sci-fi movies about predatorial clans. That owl just let the entire area know who was in charge. A heavy swooping noise then occurred and the rest of the night was quiet. Doug was able to sleep through the rest of the night. Chapter 8. Doug. Breakfast. Pre-dawn. Day 2. Doug was used to being up super early, so sleeping into 5 a.m. was a luxury. He'd felt like he overslept, but was still up significantly before anyone else. Breakfast had already been started by the crew staff, and there were fresh fire clothes by everyone's tent ready to go. They had breakfast, which today included mushrooms as well, and sausage and bacon. Another guy didn't eat sausage and bacon, so Doug got to eat his portion. He guessed that yesterday must be steak day, and today must be sausage and bacon day. There was some chatter about last night and the owl that paid them a visit. Doug didn't say anything and was wondering if anyone else had heard anything last night. Everyone said no. Doug chalked it up to his imagination. At night, in the silence, sounds are always really weird. At worst, he figured it could have been a deer. Nobody complained about any items missing, so it couldn't have been thieves. The firefighters finished eating, suited up, and by dawn, they were on their way to a new site. Chapter 9. Doug. Morning excitement. Morning day 2. Some planes and helicopters flew overhead as they had been eating breakfast, dropping red-colored retardants on the areas that they were headed to. It would hopefully provide a barrier that would make the environment safer for them to fight fires for the day. The drops were all expensive, though, and they needed to be dropped all over. The crew would be lucky to get 4 or 5 drops today. The wind had shifted, and a new area became priority. It was less remote, but the equipment had been sabotaged, and several pieces required to run the equipment were missing. Some pickup trucks that looked like a part of the fire crew went by their staging area but didn't identify themselves. Once again, the crew lead said no other crews were operating in the area. There was a new staff member with them today, a driver that would be staying with the trucks. He had a good radio and all their comm channels, and it was his job to watch over the equipment. They were further away from the base camp now, and extraction would take forever. The driver was a good guy and wanted to help, but had injuries that prevented safe cross-country mobility. Doug felt at ease, knowing someone was watching the trucks that they could radio at any time. Doug didn't feel at ease, feeling like they were being watched, and that they were nearby where the chainsaws were the day before. He looked around when he could as they walked to the day's worksite. He didn't see anything every time he looked, but couldn't help the feeling. All at once, something tremendous was bulldozing through the forest towards the crew at impossible speeds. Everyone smartly froze and then started parting ways. Past Doug trampled through a giant black bear. The bear passed by almost close enough for Doug to touch, had there been a second to make that choice. Everyone else came out where they had jumped from and stared at Doug. He looked around like nothing happened. Seemingly oblivious to the situation, he shrugged at everyone like it wasn't a big deal. This made everyone a mixture of nervous and calm. "Come on, guys, we got work to do," he told everyone, trying to act like it wasn't a big deal. They all nodded and proceeded up the hill in their semi-line pattern. They worked throughout the day, and Doug noticed there was no longer a second group of chainsaw noises in the distance. The crew cut down the small trees and mid-level brush that cleared a sideways path down to dirt about 10 feet wide, and followed up with deep grooves in the ground. Everyone seemed to be going normal. Everything seemed to be going normal. Then it was snack time. Chapter 10, Doug. Unusual day. Afternoon, day 2. Everyone seemed to be in good spirits and was even trading the occasional joke. Smoke passed through every few moments, which Doug could only seem to notice when he stopped moving. The wind had turned their direction, and ash was falling everywhere like snow. He felt his phone vibrate. He got a text message. He must be high enough to catch a tower somewhere that had power. His friends wanted to get together and was wondering when he could take a break, since he was sort of in town. He texted them back that hopefully he could sync up with them in a few days once he was done fighting the fire and the rain would hopefully start. Then told them about roughly where he was. He sent the message, and the bars had already died again, so it would sit in queue until it could send. He looked around as he heard some fidgeting, and it seemed like everyone was ready to get back to business. Everyone grabbed their gear and adjusted their helmets and assumed their positions on the dirt line they'd been making. The work went silently along, cleaving through the various plant litter and biological byproducts on the ground. Everyone shifted their way slowly around the mountain at a steady pace. The therapy continued throughout the afternoon, as the chainsaws, picks, and shovels did their work, as they have for hundreds of years. Not having big equipment was irritating, but supposedly there was backup parts coming tomorrow to get the bigger machines up and running. It would make this work easier, but Doug enjoyed the solitary nature of smaller hand equipment. Yes, carrying it all up a mountain, include multiple gallons of fuel for the chainsaws, was a pain, but the trip back always felt amazing. It was always about the journey, he thought. There seemed to be an uncomfortable feeling in the air that unsettled Doug as they curved their way around the hill. Doug recognized this feeling as right before something was about to go wrong. He turned a weird way to look at a spot where the negative space seemed out of place. A shot rang out, and a bullet missed his back by an inch, piercing the water bladder in his pack. He dove to the ground and yelled at everyone to take cover. Doug flung his rifle around, racked around, and opened fire in the direction he heard the fire coming from. Then Doug yelled, "Contact back!" as loud as he could. He wanted to let everyone know that the rounds were coming from him down the hill. Doug immediately wanted to gain fire superiority and give everyone else cover. Another shot flew over his head, and several shots towards the people to his left and right. He put rounds down the field where he guessed about they were coming from. Despite the fact that he couldn't see, the opposing force wasn't combat trained, or they would have had someone up the trail providing enfilade fire. They would have suffered heavy casualties that way. Doug was thankful there hadn't been more preparation and training into the enemy's plans. Doug emptied his mag as fast as he could, hoping someone else got into the fight soon. Within seconds, a thunderous round ripped down range from above and behind him, shredding everything in its path. There's the Galil, he thought, right on time. Doug reached behind him into his pack and got a fresh mag, refilling his rifle and stuffing his spent mag into his pocket. He racked another round and then yelled, "Moving, cover me!" He waited a few seconds and heard the gal yelling back down at him, "Move!" He heard her firing rate increase, and he sprinted further up the trail. He didn't hear any shots come after him, and in fact ended up hearing two more of his crew begin to return fire. Doug dived into a ditch that was being worked on by his fellow crew members. One of the crew was in the ditch, firing downhill into parts unknown. It was only a foot deep, but enough to provide some cover, as there was quite a bit of debris piled up behind it. Doug knew he only needed a few feet of dirt to protect him as long as the rounds being fired weren't too aggressive. The scenario started to work in Doug's head. There were 4 guys below them in good hiding spots. The crew that Doug was with was largely untrained. Out of the 20 guys, there were maybe only about 6 firing back. Unless they're extremely lucky, this was going to be an ugly trade. Doug's primary goal was the safety of his crew. The guy watching the vehicles chimed in, "What's going on up there? Are those gunshots?" Doug calmed in. "We're taking fire. I'm going to drive them away from your exit. You guys head back towards the direction of the vehicles." There was silence on the comms and more gunfire, with his side sending more than they were receiving. Thankfully, this unfortunately meant they would run out of ammunition, and he had no idea how much they took with them.